candidates in the hot seat. And we also hope to be able to take some questions from folks who are on this call, as well as on Facebook. So we'll be keeping track of that. But I'll pass it to Jonathan and he can get us started.
Thank you, Vanessa. And thank you, everybody who's tuning in. My name is Jonathan Rodriguez. Can you see me? Can you hear me? The quick check. In Zoom these days, you need it. Can you hear me? Hi. All right, folks can see me and hear me now. All right, hey, everybody, hi. My name is Jonathan Rodriguez and I'm a Mijente member here in Boston, really proudly so, an organizer as my day job, and Mijente is my political home day and night. Because what I think we're building here is at its very core based on the principles that Vanessa outlined earlier, and that's why we took the time to really explain why we see electoral organizing as an intervention and part of the different tactics that we want to take to get to el buen vivir, right? To get to the lives of dignity that we deserve. So today, we wanted to have and introduce two amazing candidates, two amazing women that are running, that I can, already knowing these candidates, can already say that they don't see themselves as mediators of movements, but as movement builders. And I definitely want to ask some questions and get to know, and hope to ask folks to get to know each other here in the course of the next hour. So I wanted to begin introducing each candidate, and then I have questions pertaining to Marianela, and I have some questions for Damali, and then I wanted to have some questions that will cover both. And I think hopefully we'll get through those and we can have maybe some Q&A at the end. So that's generally how we want to go. So to start things off, so we have Dora Marianela Rivera from Lawrence. Marianela is a physical therapist currently in the Peabody Public Schools. She's also has served in the Lawrence Public Schools school committee for 2 terms in a very difficult time during school turnover there in Lawrence, that takeover rather, that is still going on in the fight in Lawrence for self-determination there, that I'm sure Marianela can explain more. She is also the coordinator of GLASIA, the Greater Lawrence Education Justice Alliance, a group that really unites educators, parents, and students to fight for education justice issues. So I'm really proud to have Marianela join us today. And she is running for state rep in Lawrence, Methuen, and Andover. And I'm so sorry, Marianela, I do not have the number, the state rep district listed. You're gonna have to fill that in for me. I'm so sorry. And Damali is the city councilor currently in Chelsea. And I'm so proud to have Damali as well, someone that really shows up in our communities. And I just a little story about Damali, because I think it's hilarious, of how, maybe not the first time we met, but my first impression of Damali is we were doing this political theater a couple of years ago, protesting Promesa, the horrible deal that Congress did for Puerto Rico amidst its fiscal issues. And we were doing this political theater about the banks that want dollar for dollar what they in the island, really trying to, as vultures, trying to come up and make sure that people of Puerto Rico are squeezed of every dollar. And it was a great political theater. I happened to play the banker, and my years in theater in high school, I really played it a little harshly. And Damali came after me saying, "I don't know if I like you after that." And so I think it's just a funny story of just how we are really feeling what's happening in solidarity with these movements. And for Damali as a leader, I know that she takes the movement seriously, and for both Marianela and Damali, like I said, as not mediators of movements, but as movement builders. So let's get us started. I'm sorry for my little tangent there, Damali, but I love that story when I think about it. But first of all, for getting to know your district a little bit, for both of you, for Marianela, tell us a little bit about Lawrence and the community there. How has our community, our Latino community, Latinx community in Lawrence been engaged in electoral politics? How is your candidacy bringing a different vision to that district? And for Damali, in a similar way, how does your election, your candidacy play for Chelsea and the district in Chelsea that covers part of Chelsea? How are you bringing Chelsea into this race? So both questions about you can definitely tell us a little bit more about yourself. I obviously didn't cover fully, but also about your district. And if we can start with Marianela.
Sure. Well, I just want to thank Mijente and everybody here watching for this opportunity. Really honored to be amongst y'all and to have the opportunity to talk about my community and the needs of my community. Because anytime we're able to have this platform to speak truth to power and spread awareness on the issues, it's definitely a blessing and it helps to expand our movement. So I was born and raised here in Lawrence. Lawrence is a beautiful, beautiful immigrant city, rich in history. What I love most about Lawrence is the fact that we are a majority Latinx community, and we also have majority Latinx representation. I say that, and that's really important because some Latino communities don't have adequate representation. Their elected leaders don't reflect the people in the community, and here in Lawrence we do. I just want to briefly mention, though, that just because they're skin folk, doesn't mean that they're kinfolk. I just want to throw that out there because we do have some leaders in politics who, outwardly represent us, but don't actually represent us at the table. And that's really important. That's ultimately the reason why I'm running, is because we need to have leaders who will speak up for the most marginalized and disenfranchised and be very fierce about it, and not be afraid to just speak truth to power. So Lawrence also has a really beautiful labor history. For those of you who aren't aware, the Bread and Roses strike happened here in Lawrence in 1912, and it was a strike that shook America. And because of that, it led to the workers' rights that we had today, right? A lot of us, take those weekends and 40-hour work weeks for granted, but it was because women organized here in the community and they fought for better working conditions. And that's a really important part of our history here in Lawrence, and something that, I hold near and dear to my heart because I am pro-union and very union strong. And that's just something that we have to, just honor in our city's history. So that's a little bit about my community. And I'm just really excited about the opportunity to run for state rep. It's for the 17th Essex District, Jonathan, by the way. And my campaign isn't about running for a seat. It's about building a bigger table so that all our voices are heard, especially the immigrant population, because many of our immigrant population, those undocumented, they're afraid. And because COVID-19 has disproportionately impacted our community, many people are afraid to seek healthcare. Many people are afraid to report crime. And so we're living in some very scary times. That's just a little bit about our community currently.
Thank you, Thank you, Marianela. Really appreciate it. 17th Essex, everybody. Lawrence, Methuen, and Andover. Passing it on to Damali.
Hi, Jonathan and everybody here. Mi gente, ¿cómo estamos? My name is Damali. My pronouns are she, hers, ella, goddess, diosa, whatever you prefer. I am proudly running for state representative for the 2nd Suffolk District. That's most of my hometown, Chelsea, and all of Charlestown. And I don't want to look at myself when I'm speaking. Okay. most of Chelsea and all of Charlestown. Chelsea, according to the last US Census, is about 64% Latinx community, but we have a huge undocumented population, so I suspect that that number is way higher. When I first came into politics in 2015, there was not one Latinx person at the table. A bunch of folks ran, and we drove the highest voter turnout in 12 years, and we finally had majority Latinx representation. And to this day, we still have a majority Latinx representation on the city council. So since I've been on the city council, you know, I focus on the issues that affect Latinx communities, that affects all communities, which is housing, environmental, transit, and transparent government. I feel that there's been a lot of funny business happening in back rooms, and so people don't feel like they want to get involved into politics. And for me, I know that before I got into politics, I didn't feel like it was a system that worked for me. And in many times, sometimes I still don't, but nonetheless, you know, we have to do something. And so what my goal is right now is I'm getting to know the other part of my district, which is Charlestown. Charlestown, the disparity there is a lot more blatant, is a lot more in your face. And in light of all of these conversations that are happening across the country with respect to Black Lives Matter and racial inequities in all of our systems, it's really in your face in Charlestown. And it's something that when you talk to folks of higher means and folks of lesser means, or folks that are Black or whatever, everybody identifies that there's a lot of division and they want to talk about it. So again, COVID-19 ultimately disproportionately affecting Black and brown communities across the state and the Commonwealth, specifically Chelsea, is what drove me to run for office. I sit across the street, my house is from a park, and there was a pop-up pantry, and there was mothers for hours waiting with their small children just to get a box of food to last them for a week. That is not the America that I was taught about. That is not the values that I believe in. And so I want to make sure that when we rebuild post-pandemic, that there's a voice at the table from someone that comes from these lived experiences that can adequately advocate for our communities, because our status quo electeds that have been in office have been way too comfortable with the cycles continuing as it was, and those days are no more. COVID has exposed vulnerabilities that we can no longer ignore, and these mass mobilizations happening across the state are telling us that enough is enough and we need to step up. So that's why I'm stepping up. That's why I'm running for the 2nd Suffolk District. Yeah, that's my district.
Thank you, Damali. Thank you. I hope folks expand upon your stories and your districts. I think there's so much to learn from the organizing happening in Chelsea, the organizing happening in Lawrence. And that's kind of my next question, right? So talk about some experiences working with grassroots groups, with community organizing in your districts, both in your role in your elected positions you might have had, or in your outside roles. How has that organizing, how have you contributed to that organizing locally? Or your involvement with grassroots organizations?
Is there an order?
No, yeah, let me, you can start the money if you like.
Oh, okay, I wasn't ready, but okay, grassroots organizing. I mean, essentially, I think it was Deval Patrick one time that said that there's 2 parties in politics. It's the outside politics and the inside politics, and I'm definitely an outsider. I definitely don't look like a traditional politician, nor do I want to, nor do I want to subscribe to the ideology, and I try to be as real as possible. So everything for me has been grassroots. I literally had to fight my way to the top there, to the top of Chelsea politics. There has not been a path paved for any Latinx representation. As I said before I got there wasn't any representation on the city council. So when COVID, for example, hit, or actually, let me rewind. When I got into politics, I was like, why aren't people more involved in politics? We had a city manager form of government. And I thought that maybe it was that. Maybe if we had a mayor, people would be more inclined to be engaged civically. So I started a petition, and at first it was me. It was Chelsea Revolution, me with a t-shirt that said Chelsea Revolution, a clipboard and a pen, and I started going door knocking and talking to people about what the difference between a city manager and a mayor was, hoping that maybe we could do a ballot initiative and start some conversations and figure out how do we bring more people in. By me knocking on doors and introducing myself to people, before you know it, I had like 15, 20 people, and we all had Chelsea Revolution. So I went from an army of 1 to a team of 20, and we're going around and we're door knocking and we're talking about it. We're in the paper. We're so excited. And then as we're mobilizing, people were like, well, why don't you run for city council? And I'm like, because I'm not a politician. And they said, well, maybe that's why you should. So they banded behind me along with the community. So my entire campaign has been grassroots. I had no name recognition. I didn't study political science in school. I didn't grow up and say, I want to be a city councilor when I grow up. I'm just a regular old person, a mom, an activist that just got tired of seeing the same old, same old. So everything about my resume is grassroots. But when you look at COVID and you saw the response that the governor, the lack of response that the governor was giving and the lack of leadership that we saw across the Commonwealth, I was extremely disturbed because we need revolution t-shirts. Sorry. One of the governor was literally telling his staff to telling municipalities not to report on individual numbers from the city. And that was a little concerning to me because we knew here internally in Chelsea, we were keeping track of the numbers that we were the highest infection rate in the state, as well as the highest rate of death. And so he wanted to do like a blanket approach. And it's like, no, communities are disproportionately impacted. Communities like Brockton and Springfield and Lawrence and Chelsea, it's not, you can't approach it that way. So what did I do? I reached out to my grassroots organizations and groups and leaders in the community, and we wrote a letter and we sent it to the governor and said, look, these are the statistics and we need more from you. So it's that that organizing, that grassroots, it fuels me. It is what I am. I know what it is to be on the crapper end of the stick, pardon my French. So it's important to me. I know what it is to fight. And so I know what it is to come from the bottom. So grassroots is essentially my middle name.
Thank you, Damali. Thank you. I know that to be true. I'm glad you shared. Marianela, same question. And I already spoiled it by talking about your glacier work. But if you wanted to expand on that, I would love you to, if you could.
Sure.
Talk about your grassroots work in Lawrence.
Sounds good.
And how do we as grassroots, I should expand on it a little bit. How does grassroots relate if you winning this seat? How do you relate with the grassroots once you're there? Go ahead.
I appreciate that question, and I can relate to a lot to Damali, 100%, because everything about me has been grassroots about inception. How about now? Can you hear me now? All right, a rookie mistake. So I was just saying that I can relate a lot to Damali because a lot about me is me doing this because I'm trying to lift the voices up in my community and just tired of seeing the same old. I ran for school committee back in 2015 as a last minute sticker campaign. It didn't get any more grassroots than me ripping up little pieces of paper with my name on it, vote for me. And I won school committee with 6 votes. It was like at the final hour, I literally just went to go vote as a mom, and I was looking at my ballot and no one decided to pull papers and run for school committee. So that had me really concerned, thinking like, wow, like nobody feels compelled enough to be a leader in our community. Like, well, I guess that leader should be me. So I wrote my name in, and as I was on the school committee, I started opening up my eyes to the issues in education reform around the country, particularly around state takeovers of schools. Lawrence has been under receivership for almost a decade now, and we're not seeing many improvements in our education, but what we are seeing is the slow privatization of our schools. And so that's where GLAJA came in. The Greater Lawrence Education Justice Alliance was formed to fight the privatization of our schools, because had that charter cap been lifted, we would have been New Orleans 2.0. Our whole entire school system would have been privatized. We would have continued to be completely disenfranchised, because what the act relative to the achievement gap does that dictates state takeovers of schools, it essentially strips the entire school committee of any power to have any say over what happens to our children's education in schools. And that to me is unconstitutional, because we are tax-paying citizens in this community. We provide that taxation. We should have that representation on the school committee. But sadly, my experiences revealed that there were many issues affecting my neighbors and my community, many issues affecting my constituents that would be brought to my attention, but I would have no power to even try to talk about policy, because several times there were items that were just restricted from even being put on our agenda. So we couldn't even talk about the issues that were affecting us. And so, we fought, Glacia fought against the privatization of our schools, and Glacia also fought alongside other educators and students and parents and activists across the state to push for the passing of the Student Opportunity Act. So I continue to be the coordinator of the Greater Lawrence Education Justice Alliance, and we focus a lot on civic education. And I wouldn't even say that we empower folks, because the thing is, people have power, right? They just need to recognize that they have that power, they have that voice, and we need to lift up our voices in unison to really fight for the changes that we want in our community. And so that has really been the bulk of my work in Lawrence, has been grassroots organizing, getting parents and students and teachers involved in this work to really fight for our democracy back, because it has eroded as a result of the state takeover of our schools. And so ultimately, that was the reason that really drove me to run for state representative, because the law needs to be amended, because as the law stands right now, it's completely disenfranchising communities of color. It has disenfranchised us in Lawrence, Holyoke, and Springfield. These state takeovers only happen in Black and brown communities, and they're a method that's used to privatize education, and that's really problematic. And now, because of COVID-19, we're facing budget cuts to education again, even though we worked hard to pass the Student Opportunity Act. And so we need to have legislators who have knowledge in education, right? Who prioritize education funding and put our children first, right? Because they are our future. They're the future leaders of the world. And we have to make sure that they have all the tools and resources needed to be successful. And the reality is, all this teaching to a test is not preparing our youth for the jobs of the future. And I worry about that. As a mom, I worry about that. And we just need to have fierce people at the State House telling it how it is and giving the power back to the people. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mariana. I'm switching back and forth the names here, y'all. I'm so sorry. The next question is for Damali. And let me make sure my video is shown correctly. All right, so the next question is for Damali and Marianela. To start with Damali, what are the top 3 issues relevant to the Latinx community in your district, and what are your stances on them, right? I believe folks touched upon them a little bit already. If you want to dive deeper on the issues and how it relates to State House advocacy and State House policy, I'd appreciate it. Damali, let's start with you, and then Marianela.
That is a fully loaded question. So, I mean, I'll give you the general answer, and then I'll get a little deeper. So the general answer, as far as what my 3 priorities are with respect to my district, is housing, is environmental justice. Chelsea has the highest rate of asthma in the entire state, and one of the highest rates of cancer. As well as the highest rate of childhood hospitalizations as a result of asthma. Charlestown also has one of the highest rates in the state. We got this Tobin that goes right through the middle of our city. The housing projects in Charlestown are strategically placed right under the bridges. We have environmental burdens that are out of control. Like, we hold the road salt for the New England region. 100% of the jet fuel that's used in the airport comes through the Chelsea Creek. So environmental is something that a lot of people often sleep on, but it's actually disproportionate. We're an environmental justice community. It disproportionately affects Black and brown communities. And so housing, environmental, and then education. As Dr. Marianela Rivera said, the Student Opportunities Act it's a bit of a joke after all the work that's been done for us to not be adequately funding our schools that we already know are failing our kids. And when you continue to underfund schools and overfund prisons, it's just kind of, the proof is in the pudding. Anywho, so but those are the 3 that are specific to the district overall. But if it were up to me, I'd be talking about criminal justice reform, and if it were up to me, I'd be talking about immigration. Something that I was talking to with someone on my political team recently is that I've done a bunch of endorsements in the past couple of months trying to get endorsed, obviously, for the state rep race. And not one person has asked me about immigration. And so that to me is like, you know, we know what DACA is up against. We know what's happening right now in this country, the national sentiment that's coming from the commander in chief. We see what's happening here, and nobody's actually talking about these things. So, but I think ultimately, Jonathan, Mijente, everybody, the one thing that is the number one thing that I feel that really plagues our communities of color and the Latinx community specifically is a lack of representation. A lack of representation of where we intersect. Like, we can talk about these issues as if they're siloed. We could talk about housing, we could talk about environment, we could talk about education. But the fact of the matter is that all this intersects. And at the end of the day, in the core are Black and brown communities that are left behind because of the inequities in all of those systems. And until we're having a holistic conversation about the overall system, we're only saying half a story. And so I just want to make sure that we talk about that. But just as we look at these issues intersectionally, I think it's also important to talk about intersection, where Latinx intersects with LGBTQ, where Latinx intersects with Black folk, where it intersects with a bunch of other identities. I live in intersection, I embrace intersection, and I'm always willing to learn more. I believe the more people that are at the table or involved in the process, that the better that we do to amplify our voices. So I think ultimately having that holistic, you know, there's people that are like, these are my 3 issues. These are my 3 issues that I'm going to the State House with them. And it's just not that simple. At the end of the day, if we really, really want to correct or address systemic inequities, we need to look at the overall picture. So I think that representation matters. Shout out to Ayanna Presley. But I think we really need that. That's ultimately it, along with all the other issues and where they intersect.
Thank you, Damali. Thank you so much. Marianela.
Yes.
Feel free to expand. Go for 5. But what are your priorities and how?
For sure. I mean, a lot of the priorities that we have here in Lawrence are very similar to the priorities that Damali mentioned for Chelsea. I feel like Chelsea is definitely like our sister city in the struggle. I mean, it depends on who you ask in the community, right? And so, part of what I mentioned earlier about my campaign, it's not about a seat, it's about building a bigger table. So we've been really mindful about the conversations we have with people, and we really want to hear what people's concerns are. And so if you were to ask me, I would say, education justice is at the forefront because we have been so disenfranchised under this state takeover. We don't have a say in what happens in our youth's education, and that's really problematic. The teaching to the test is problematic. And so because we want to prepare our children for jobs that are going to be available, because the economists are saying, by 2050, about like 50% of jobs are going to be subject to automation. So what are we doing now to prepare our kids for those jobs, right, that are going to be left? And so that requires fostering critical thinking skills, right? Not only for those jobs, but like the problems of the world, right? Because what if our children are encountering these same similar issues that Damali and I have noticed, right? And who's going to step up then? And so I would say number 2 would be transparency and accountability of our government. I'm really concerned about disaster capitalism, right? I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to read Naomi Klein's The Shock Doctrine. But the reality is, when we're facing disasters, that's when corrupt politicians take the opportunity to, carry out their nefarious agendas. And so now more than ever, we need leaders that, no tienen pelo en la lengua, right? That they just tell it how it is and they call out what's happening and they speak truth to power, and they're going to be transparent and accountable to the people. We need that now more than ever. So I would say that's number 2, because, the last legislative session, they voted no on making committee votes public, which I find very problematic, since the majority of states, the legislators make their committee votes public. So we need our state house to be completely transparent and accountable to the people. And the other issue, being a physical therapist that has worked in this community in early intervention, doing home visiting with our babies and toddlers and working in home care with our elderly, I see the issue around housing. I have had the very unfortunate experience to walk into a home where 3 families are living in a 2-bedroom apartment, right? Because they can't afford the high cost of rent. And so that is really problematic here in our community. There are many people that are concerned about gentrification. And so housing is definitely a top issue that is being brought up. I would also say that, when talking to my community members, COVID-19 is definitely at the forefront because of the way that it's impacted Lawrence. Lawrence is also one of the communities that has been heavy hit because of the pandemic. And so addressing all issues around healthcare, access to healthcare is really critical. Moving to a single payer healthcare system is really critical. Let's talk about that real quick, because these premiums and deductibles are getting really expensive. I mean, myself as a single mom, I struggle with it myself. And, I have a good job, but, it's a problem that, we in Massachusetts just need to make sure we're addressing. Heading toward that single payer system would be an effective way to address the public health issues within our community, because we have to understand, especially when it comes to the immigrant population who are scared to reach out for healthcare, that what impacts like a small portion of our community impacts all of us. And so we need to, teamwork makes the dream work, right? We need to work at this as a team and move forward and address these issues. But a lot of the issues that we're facing here in Lawrence are very similar to the ones that Chelsea brought up. And there are definitely issues that are on the forefront that we're trying to address together as a community.
Thank you both. Great. So obviously we got to expand that question, is the feedback I'm getting from both of you, because you're right, the intersection of these issues, and especially where both communities are at, it's too hard to put it into just 3. And as a Commonwealth, we like to pat ourselves in the back. Massachusetts does, right? But we know, you both are running against, and that's my next question, you both are running against Democrats challenging for this seat. And I wanted to ask you guys to speak on that a little bit more. The why, expanding upon the passion that drove you to run here. I know you've already touched upon it a little bit, Damali and Marianela. If you wanted to expand on it, I think I want to give you guys both your chances.
Sure, thank you so much. So I am a physical therapist, and I decided to become a physical therapist because I love helping people. There's so much, my job is so emotionally rewarding, but what hurts me is when I'm establishing rapport with my patients, my clients, and my students, and I'm hearing all the things that are impacting their lives, right? And there are all issues that are systemic, right? And so when I worked for Lawrence Public Schools, I started to see the impacts that the laws that are being passed at the federal and state level, how that impacts my students. And that was heartbreaking. And so, that really led me into, a life of politics. It was really to try to better serve those that I'm already serving in the community as a physical therapist. And so the passion and the fire really is, I don't want to see those around me suffer. I feel like I'm constantly seeing a train wreck and no one's doing anything about it, right? Like, I'm like, are you seeing this? Like, especially our elected leaders, like, you're not talking about it. And so to me, it's really important to empower those around me, to provide them the civic education that they need and the awareness that they need around the problems, to really organize and mobilize folks and put pressure on the other elected leaders to actually address these issues, right? Like Damali talked about environmental justice issues. That's also something big here in our community as well that nobody's talking about. Lawrence also has some of the highest rates of asthma. And I think it was Dr. Faber out of Northeastern University that put out a study a few years back talking about how Lawrence is 14th out of all the communities in the Commonwealth that are exposed to environmental hazards the most. And nobody around here is talking about that. And so for me, like, what's driving my passion is the fact that I feel that silence is complicity, right? And I'm not afraid to speak about the things that are happening in my community. I'm not as afraid to talk about, you know, the research and what's out there and what we need to do. And so in having these dialogues, right, like civil discourse is a good thing. Like we can disagree about things, but let's talk about things. And we're just not having conversations about issues that are impacting our community. And that to me is problematic. And I really want to use this run for office to empower people and lift up their voices to the level of the state house so that we can finally address some of these issues that have been impacting us for years. But the reality is a lot of has been neglected in my community, and I want to get the chance to finally address them head on with my community members by my side. And so that's something that you see very differently when other elected leaders run for office. You know, you only see them around when they're campaigning, and then once they're in office, they're gone, right? And so for me, it's important that whoever is elected is going to be present, is going to be engaging community members with these conversations, and is going to actually get the work done, you know, with their colleagues at the state house. And so for me, that's really the fire and the passion. All things justice in all forms is really what's driving me to ensure that, you know, because I don't think that politicians should be like a lifelong thing, right? People should step up when they feel like they have the tools and the resources and the expertise, right, in order to get the job done, and then step back when somebody else steps up. But it should never be a lifelong thing. And so I would love to go back to my profession and see my students in special education with the tools and the resources that they need, right? But the reality is, like, I can't do that work without the proper funding, right? Like, and without the laws that need to be in place so that my students can be successful. So ultimately, like, I got to give a shout out to my students, because this is probably going to be like the biggest lesson I'll ever teach them, that when you see something wrong in society, when you see things that are happening that you don't agree with, that hurts the people around you, step up and speak out. And so that to me is ultimately what's driving me. And I just hope I get the opportunity to get there and do what's right for those that I have been serving in my community.
Jonathan, what was the question, the way you framed it?
I framed it on, you know, we're a democratic state. We're patting ourselves on the back all the time of all the good we're doing. And both of you are challenging. Why is that? Why is this moment calling for a challenge from you and Marianela?
Cool. So like Marianela, I'm also driven by the love of my daughter. And I got into this to try to make sure that I was creating a better world that I feel comfortable passing on to her. And so that's what's been driving me from day one. And my love for her and for my nieces and nephews and all my community kids by far supersedes my complacency in the status quo. And so it's important for me to make sure that I'm always doing what I can to foster that world. And so I don't typically subscribe to like titles and labels. I think it typically confines us into these little boxes. And so, yeah, I guess we're both Democrats. And, you know, when I first got into politics, because I was like an outsider, I heard all this liberal and progressive and all these names. And I'm like, who am I? I don't know. All I know is that this is wrong. This feels wrong, that this doesn't seem fair. And so that's essentially how I got into it. So yes, I am challenging a Democrat, and he is a very nice guy. And I would never say anything that's bad about him. Unfortunately, he's comfortable. These are conversations that he and I have had. I think he feels he needs to stay in that comfort zone because of the district he represents. I can't stay in that comfort zone because I know what it is to be ignored from the district that he represents. And so, you know, que vale? Well, what does it matter to have someone in a position that's not going to adequately stand up? And so, you know, I often say, like, the contrast between me and my opponent is he's a really good guy and he sponsors a basketball team. I run the basketball league. He often attends community events. I often organize them and I'm a speaker at them. He might do robocalls. I actually call people one-on-one. He's transactional. I am transformational. I don't have the time or the ability to sit back and twirl my thumbs while I know that people are hungry, they don't have homes, they're breathing in toxic airs. I don't have those luxuries. So whether he's a Democrat or Republican or independent, I don't care. All I know is that this time, right now in this world, after COVID and after these movements, the civil rights movements that are happening across the state, if you're not going to be inclusive of all, then the right thing to do in respect of this movement is to step to the side and let me lead, because I know that I can be more inclusive.
Thank you, Damali. All right, so looking at my questions here, making sure we didn't skip any good ones. So let's talk about COVID response, right? So we are in this time, our State House has done precious little. I mean, they've been, in Portuguese, we say like pushing everything with their stomach, just like pushing it for a later day. They've done some things in the beginning, but it's amazing at just how comfortable they are in waiting. I mean, I'm leading the witnesses here a little bit too much, but talk to me about what your ideal COVID response would have been from the State House, and if it is to pass that you're elected and we're still in this position, what would you fight for to pass immediately once you get in? Let's start with Marianela again. Thank you.
You're so lucky. I was so ready.
You were ready? I mean, I honestly think that there was a delayed response. And by delay, I mean, we should have been listening to the epidemiologists back when they predicted that this pandemic was going to hit like years ago. They predicted it like over a decade ago. And so there should have been active preparation that was happening leading up to a pandemic, where it be, warehouses full of PPEs ready on deck in case anything were to go down. But the reality is there was such a delayed response, right? Such a lack of preparedness. And that ultimately was the reason why communities like Lawrence and like Chelsea were so hard hit. In addition to that, I would say, there was such an emphasis or a focus, especially when it comes to like the rent and housing issue, on the moratorium being on evictions rather than stopping rent and mortgage collections, because people were bleeding out financially, while losing their jobs and waiting for unemployment. And so that was a big worry here in our community. In addition to that, with just the current climate and immigration and everything like that, there are people in our community that are afraid to seek care. And so you have people suffering in silence. And so that to me was also, problematic with the response to COVID-19. I think we should have been way more prepared, and we should have handled things a whole lot differently in terms of putting the emphasis on, the people and ensuring that our people are safe and well taken care of. With regards to education, I think COVID-19 put a spotlight on the inequities that already existed in education. They weren't new, it just put a spotlight and highlighted the problems of the digital divide. And so you had many students that were not able to access their education, especially many students who receive special education services that, really fell behind. And so now there's this like rush to go back to school in September. But while there's this rush, school systems are expected to cut the budget by 10 to 20%. And so I just don't understand why we're expected to do, more with less funding. And so I'm really concerned actually about the transition back to school. I think the report by Desi left us with way more questions and concerns over our children and staff members' safety. And so I just feel like the response just hasn't been adequate. The delay really hurt us. And I think we need to think through these things a lot longer. a lot harder in order to keep our people safe. There shouldn't be such a rush to open things back up. You know what I mean? The emphasis should be on closing things down, making sure that, you know, the virus isn't spreading, and then opening things back up very gradually. I would even say more gradually than we've done, and ensuring that people have the tools and resources and the education needed to remain safe. That has been a concern in our community as well. You see people wearing masks backwards with the filter on the outside. And so, you know, things like that have been a really big concern here in Lawrence.
Thank you. Let's throw it to Damali.
I agree as far as having a lack of preparedness. And I would also say there was also a lack of transparency, a sweeping under the rug, and almost like an unwillingness to accept the disproportionate impact that it was having on specific communities, particularly communities of color. And more than that, it also, like, we can talk about that, right? But let's talk about the fact that many communities of color, Latinx communities, immigrant communities, were already at a deficit for the amount of services that we needed overall with respect to housing and schooling and everything. What I would have done different is, if I'm going to have, first of all, public health would take precedence over the need to stimulate an economy or to open up business. That's number one. Number two, we saw what happened with these phase reopenings in some of the other states that opened too soon. They're reversing, a lot of them are reversing these phase reopenings. Number three, if I'm gonna have a reopen task force, I'm gonna have actually people that work in on that task force so we can properly assess what we're doing, and not just CEOs and big business at the table making decisions for everyone. Especially when I think about in Chelsea in particular, where 80% of our population are essential workers. And essential workers, I'm not saying they're doctors and nurses. Trabajan de mantenimiento, and when they took their $12, $13 an hour job, they didn't think they'd be the front lines of a global pandemic, right? But at the end of the day, they had to. And so I would make sure that I would include the voices of regular old folks. And the last thing I want to say is that everything about this has been inequitable. Even the contact tracing that they keep, don't worry, we're doing contact tracing and we're going to make sure that we figure this out. That in and of itself is extremely inequitable because it assumes that everybody lives in a single family home. It assumes that everybody has one full-time job. It doesn't take into consideration multi-generational living, 2, 3, 4 jobs that people have to work in order to make ends meet in our communities. And so what happens is you're filling out that information. And then you're filling out that information. There's nowhere, the little boxes, you don't fit in those little boxes. So it goes into like this little side section, the side note section, and nobody ever talks about it. It's not captured in the contact tracing that they're assuring us with. So I think it's so important for us to continue to recognize that we need to elect people that have lived experience, that understand the struggles, that know that there's multi-generational families that are living in small apartments, that understand that there are people that have to work 2, 3 jobs, that understand the realities of what our folk are dealing with on a real level, to be able to legislate in a way that's reflective of the needs of the communities.
Thank you, Damali. Thank you, Dr. Rivera, once more. I think folks are right to share exactly all those points. I fear for the tsunami of evictions that are coming for our communities. I mean, the kind of the violent level of gentrification that will hit our communities, and the scapegoating of our communities when we are put in the front lines. We are not, our DNA is not more susceptible that we know of to COVID, but we know that it is being put on the front lines and without the adequate supports. This state has done basically nothing for immigrants in the era of Trump, and that is something we should be ashamed of. And that's my last and I think final question, and I wanted to open it up to other folks. And it is about immigrant rights, where you touched upon that, Damali. I'll throw it to you first. What does the state need to do to actually honor our immigrant neighbors and do something for the protection, the support of our immigrant neighbors in the state?
Safe Communities Act, Sanctuary State, licenses for undocumented folks, allow undocumented folks to vote in municipal elections. And we need to protect our residents, not for nothing, but this is a country of immigrants. And I'm really tired of us talking about immigration. Like all of a sudden, immigration is a term that only means brown people that come from Central America or from Latinx countries. And that's just not the reality. This country was built on the back of immigrants, and it was a whole different story when they came from European countries. And so I just feel like we need to be real about this. We need to educate one another. We need to make sure that we're protecting everyone. And I cannot believe that we're in 2020 and that we have to talk about shelter, about food, about clean air, and about protecting humanity. It's disgusting. It just shows what capitalism has done. I'm sorry, I know I get a lot of slack for that, but it's the truth. And I just think we need to do a lot better about the way that we care for one another, period. I don't, like, for me, it's like, yeah, labels, and we're talking about immigration policy, and I get it. I'm running for office. I'm a politician. I have to answer that. But all in all, at the very end of the day, it's just being a good human being and treating people with the dignity and respect that they deserve.
Thank you. Marianela, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I was just co-signing everything she just said in terms of like the Safe Communities Act, driver's license, everything. Snaps on everything Damali said, because it was on point. What I would add is just to give it a little personal touch, because I do see like within education, like the impact that it does have. You know, you have parents who are undocumented that are afraid to advocate on behalf of their child with special needs because they're afraid that, you know, they're going to be reported to ICE. In healthcare, you have immigrants who are scared to seek services because of the climate that we're living in. And so we have people in the Lawrence community that live in fear. They're living in fear, and that's not a way to live. And so, you know, for me, I want to ensure that everyone in our community feels love and that everybody in our community is well cared for. And for that purpose, I am co-signing everything Damali just said.
Thank you. Thank you both. I don't think I lied in the beginning when I said these folks are movement builders, not mediators. And I think really part of the movements in their cities and in our state that have been fighting for justice for a very long time. So just checking to see if there's any questions in the comments before I ask a couple more folks, a couple more questions around where folks can plug in. Give me 1 minute. All right, so let's ask, this one I think is very important, y'all, and very relevant. And it's about defunding the police and reinvesting in the community. Obviously, that has meant different things for different people. What does it mean for you, and what is your take on this moment of deprioritizing police and abolishing police? Who wants to take that first?
I'll take it first. So that issue has been very contentious in our community because you have some of the older population who feel that they equate safety with more police. And so there is concerns about the whole defunding the police issue, that if we defund, we're going to lose police and we're going to see a rise in crime. And so for me, what I would say to that is the reality is we need to stop putting like Band-Aids on problems that require surgery, right? And we need to stop taking a reactionary approach to things. We need to be very proactive. And so, you know, when I hear the term like defund the police, the phrase defund the police, I'm thinking more like, let's reallocate the funding to address the mental health issues in our community, to address the drug addiction, to address homelessness, to address, you know, domestic violence, to address all these things, because the reality is like our police force is very overworked, right? And they're being asked to do well checks, right? Asked to deal with the homeless. And so, you know, when I talk to members in my community about that, I'm telling them, like, rather than taking this reactionary approach and dealing with things and pushing people, fueling the mass incarceration issue, right? Like, why don't we address things very proactively and deal with our community's needs and take a more restorative justice approach to things rather than, you know, the criminal approach? And so to me, it's something really important to be addressed. you know, I would even say at an early age, because we have the cradle to prison pipeline, right? The school to prison pipeline. And so we're dealing with things within our schools. You see cycles of suspension happen because students are having maladaptive behaviors in the classroom. And so they're suspended and they're pushed down the pipeline. When in reality, what we need to do is ensure that our youth have the adjustment counselors that they need and the social workers and therapists that they need, so that we're addressing the issues of poverty and we're addressing the issues of trauma, and we're taking more of that proactive approach rather than dealing with things when it comes to the point of crime. And so that to me is an issue that is being talked about a lot in our community. Unfortunately, people are very divided about it. So it's going to require just a lot of continued dialogue and education around the issue to make sure that we're really addressing things in a holistic way.
I agree in terms of the conversation. I think that COVID did something, like the silver lining in COVID was kind of slow us down so we can start to kind of like get out of the hustle and bustle of everyday life and feel things differently. I think that knee on George Floyd's neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I think it woke a lot of people up, and where people are saying all of a sudden like, oh, whoa, there's systemic inequities. And a lot of us are like, duh, we've been talking about this forever. But we have to respect that people have different starting points. And so to expect that somebody finally wakes up in the beginning of June after that knee on the neck is going to be like, yeah, defund the police. It's just not realistic. Do we need to defund the police and reallocate funds? Absolutely. But I think it's all in the framing. And instead of calling out, we need to figure out how we pull in. And I think the way that we could do that is by talking about how can we reimagine what public safety looks like in our community? How can we reimagine what serving and protecting is? Do we need an armed policeman in our schools while our kids are changing classes? If we're trying to stop gangs from forming, maybe we need a gang interventionist. If we're trying to help kids who are acting out, maybe we need more mental health counselors in our schools. Do we need armed policemen to respond to when 80% of the calls are due to mental health or addiction? Do we need someone to show up with guns? Maybe not. Sounds to me like we need more trauma-informed therapy. It sounds to me like we need more addiction counselors, and so we need more detoxes, recovery beds. So it sounds like we really need to reimagine how we fund a lot of the systems that we participate in. But specifically, we need to demilitarize the police. I know that I think about in Chelsea, I've been trying to get a youth center in Chelsea for so long, a community center where they can go and do something productive. And it's always like, we don't have the money, we don't have the money. But our police department has an ice cream truck, and our police department has a, you know, they have a pretty healthy budget. And it's, look, in Chelsea, I'm not gonna say we're saved because we're not. We still spend way too much money than we should. We've come a long way, but there's always work to do. We spent $140,000 on ammunition in the last 7 years. And I'm like, that could have helped so many kids go to like take a football class or basketball, or to help kids so that they don't get involved in the streets in the first place. I'm a former youth worker. I was a lost person at one point in my life. I've seen all sides of it. I've also been a victim of police brutality. I see what happens when you give that power to someone. Like, it's crazy to me that a lawyer has to practice years of law in order to practice law, and you only go to the police academy for 6 months in order to enforce the law. And so that's a little off to me. So there's definitely conversation that needs to happen. But I think in order to have a real conversation, we need to think about the framing too. I know that a lot of us on, you know, because I consider myself, I guess, if I'm going to subscribe to these labels, to be on the left, right? Or liberal. That's what you kids call it these days, right? I consider myself to be pretty, you know, open-minded, but I have to respect that there's people at different starting points. And if I want to include them in the conversation, then maybe we have to go a little more behind and look at this from a bigger standpoint, from a holistic standpoint, and really talk about how can we reimagine what our communities look like. Imagine you get pulled over, Jonathan, you got a busted tail light, police officer's a certified mechanic, he pulls you over, he changes your light, and instead of a ticket, he gives you a fee. Maybe you pay an extra $20 because you didn't even take the time to go to the mechanic. But imagine if our police were community guides, and they were, you know, they were serving and protecting us in that way. Like, can we reimagine that? Like, I would love that. I think I can't imagine a human being that wouldn't want to see something where that worked, where it wasn't just an armed man at our schools or showing up to say, hey, who's, you know, I think we just need to do better. And it's just bringing everything down to a human standpoint, and really seeing the humanity in one another. And unfortunately, it took George Floyd's murder for that to happen, but it happened. And so I guess that's a silver lining in that. God rest his soul.
Thank you both. I wanted to squeeze this one in, this last one in, Damali. I know you have to go right at 8. Maybe
No, I don't. We're good.
Oh,
That was
okay.
canceled, so tranquilo.
Great. This question comes from a community champion, someone I admire, Edwin Argueta. Thank you, Edwin, for joining us. And he asked about how have you dealt and how would you deal with the continuous presence of even racism within our own party and institutions, right? I look at the recent example in Everett where the only Black woman in the city council was told she was a cancer in the city council. In Revere, city council there said they don't need a civil rights office or commission, right? That has to, I mean, how do we respond to that as Black and brown folks running for elected office?
Shout out to Edwin Argueta. I guess, I mean, I haven't been on the receiving end myself, being on the city council. So it's not like it's anything that's new to me. I am fortunate enough to be in community with Girly Adrian and to be in community with Dimple Rana. Dimple Rana and I have been youth workers for over 20 years. Years ago, we worked together. And so these are people that I admire and I respect. We have a long way to go in terms of the racial inequities that exist. How do I deal with it? I've dealt with it already. You build with like-minded folks. You organize. You don't internalize this stuff. This stuff is not ours to own. These are people's traumas, their issues to deal with. It's not up to me to have to fix theirs. You battle it. You question it. You fight. I mean, there's no other way to do it. Like if I were to be brought down every single time that somebody said something that was sexist, racist, or just disparaging to me, I don't participate, which is why I really pride myself in living an intersection. There was a conversation yesterday on social media where somebody said, everybody talks about Black Lives Matter and they're leaving the brown people behind. And I said, well, look, when I talk about Black Lives Matter, I don't exclude myself from that. I consider myself part of that movement. If you feel excluded, that's cool, but you know that it's wrong. So stand with Black Lives Matter. And when it's your turn to fight for your cause, I assure you that these Black lives will be with you too. So it's about just building with one another and finding where there's alignment and there's intersection and building. And also, like, when I get to the State House, because I intend on getting to the State House one day or another, I'm going to show up January 1st, whether they elect me or not. No, just kidding. When I get to the State House, essentially, like, it's good. I'm going to have to organize within. It's going to be hard, but I'm willing to do it and to talk with anybody that's willing to meet me where there's alignment. But I also need my people on the outside. And it can't be just my Black Lives Matter folks. And it can't be just my immigrant folks. And it can't be just my environmental folks. It's everyone that's committed to this movement and acknowledging that these inequities exist in every system. And when we build that way and we're more inclusive that way, we win. So what do you do to fight when someone's being exclusive? You be inclusive. What do you do when someone's meeting you with hate? You meet them with love. And so you could do whatever you want to do on that side. That does not reflect me. Kudos to you. I respect you. May the Lord be with you. But I'm here to build and go bigger and do beautiful things that includes all voices.
I love hearing Damali speak, by the way. Like, I'm just like, yes, girl, yes. I hope you make it to the State House. I hope I make it there too. I want to be a part of your team for sure. So I've never experienced, racist treatment toward me as a school committee member, but I have faced attacks of, defamation, people just trying to bring me down for speaking truth to power. And to be honest with you, I agree with what Damali said about being with like-minded people and having safe spaces where you can vent to people in the same struggle as you, right? And organizing folks. And so the biggest thing we can do whenever we're confronted with that type of negative energy is to transmute it and change it into a positive, right? Take that energy and use it to build, right? Like whatever, if they're coming at us because we want to tackle immigration issues or we want to tackle racial issues within our communities, then we just unite together and try to build and try to use that energy for the positive, right? To deal with the issues that we're currently facing. And so that's why it's so important to have organizations and groups like Mijente, right? So that we can stand in solidarity together and work on these issues together, because the reality is we potentially could face racist attacks, and we just have to lean on each other.
Thank you. Once again, y'all, Damali Vidot running for second Suffolk State Rep in Chelsea and Charlestown, and Dora Marianela Rivera running for the 17th Essex in Lawrence, Andover, Methuen. Where can folks plug into your campaigns, y'all?
I was just gonna say, can I make a shameless plug for my campaign? But so
no shame.
Thank you. So go to votedamali.org and register to volunteer. You can also register to donate to help out with the campaign. But this Saturday, we're having a day of action. We released a bunch of endorsements this week from different institutions, elected officials. But most importantly, for me, the average politician goes and gets, oh, this elected is endorsing me. I had a bunch of endorsements from community leaders. These are the people that are unsung heroes, often don't get any praise. And so we're all going to get together on Saturday, have a huge day of action where people are going to go out virtually and make phone calls for Damali. So you can plug in. It's from 11 to 2. It's all virtual, but all the information is on my page, which is Councilor Damali Vidot for State Rep on Facebook, or you can find me on Twitter. I'm on IG, Snapchat. So just look me up. We're having a day of action, 11 to 2. I would love for people to come and join me and to join the movement. It's an uphill battle, but we could do it together. Thank you.
And so for me, you can access information at riveraforstaterep.com. We are seeking volunteers. We have a dope team of volunteers and interns right now that are doing the work. That is such a blessing. I gotta just give it up to the Lord right quick, because he works in mysterious ways, and he have brought me a team of really cool individuals that have been helping me. We are also doing a day of action on Sunday. So it's gonna be back to back, Damali and Marianela this weekend. We are looking for people to join us virtually for phone banking. It's going to be, we got a little longer day planned ahead of us. I think my volunteer coordinator set it up from 10 to 6, but that information is on my Facebook page. So you can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Teamwork makes the dream work, y'all. So we need you to be a part of the team.
Thank you. Once again, please plug in, check them out, look them up. There's going to be plenty of opportunities. I know there's a fundraiser I know I'll be at on Friday. Damali and Marianela, Immigrant and Climate Champs, it's called. Look it up on Facebook, because we also got to put our money where our mouths are. If you have it, if you feel you can. So I think that's very important. I want to throw it to my colleague, my compa Vanessa, to close us out. And thank everybody. It's been great moderating for you guys. Thank you.
I'm just going to jump in and just thank Mijente for all the work that you do and for allowing us a platform to be able to have these conversations as real and as laid back as it's been. It's so important. I know you all endorsed me when I ran for city council. Probably you didn't think I would be back 6 months later, but I want to just thank you for just the way that you show up in this world and for highlighting these issues that are super important to the Latinx community and in all of its intersections. So shout out to all of you.
Vanessa, please.
Yeah, no, I really want to thank City Councilor Damali Vidot and Dr. Marianela Rivera for coming. I really do feel like we were in someone's sala and having a real conversation. And, you know, I think sometimes, you know, you have we ask Latinx candidates to speak to Latinx issues. And I feel like, I feel very grateful that we were able to really get into such a rich discussion. And you know, I'm really excited to support candidates that, you know, not only are really excited to win office, but to also like build and be in conversation. And I think, you know, accountability and engagement is really important. And so, you know, I think you taking the time to have this intimate conversation with us and our membership really makes me hopeful about the type of leadership we can get in our communities. And so many thanks. I want to encourage folks to not wait for a Mijente endorsement to get involved in these races. Like the candidate said, there are opportunities to volunteer. You know, this is a different era of elections that we're approaching, and so it's hard to say. You know, we're so limited from, you know, taking the streets and knocking on doors the way how we're so accustomed to doing it, and so we gotta be able to sustain these campaigns, to take on innovative tools, and we also need to just find creative ways to reach our people. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to use Mijente as a vehicle for that, but also just to directly plug in to both of your work. I mean, when we say this moment doesn't just require more of us, it doesn't just require more Latinx folks in the state legislature. It requires more from us, and the quality and the leadership that I see both of you risking, like, you know, your family time, your you know, your personal lives to make this step is just very inspiring. And so again, muchas gracias for coming, and we look forward to following and you know, virtually you know, shoulder to shoulder with y'all, and I'm really excited to see how we can support your leadership between now and September 1st. So thank you so much. And I also want to make a pitch. We will be having our Asamblea vote to do our electoral endorsements on August 1st. We're going to be inviting all members. If you are not a member yet and you identify as Latinx, Chicanx, and are aligned with our Pro-Pueblo values, become a member, and that's at www.mijente.net/join. And we'll be reaching out to you shortly after that to make sure that our members are able to engage in this campaign. And I'm glad that this conversation will be used as a tool to be able to talk to our membership in the greater community. So thank you very much for that. So I think we're done, colorín colorado.
Yes, you can stop live casting on Facebook, Vanessa.
All right.
Same way you